Okay. While we're waiting for everyone to join us today, I want to quickly talk about what we have going on this week. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone. Okay. Let's see here. All right. So this week, we're going to review a little bit of Chapter 8, Working with Style Sheets, for part of the lecture today. And we're also going to be looking at how we define selectors. Defining selectors, CSS selectors, is very important for everything that we will be doing with the web design and HTML development. We're going to be looking at basically how we create them today, selecting the elements by name, by class or ID, creating selectors by context, selecting by part of an element, selecting links based on their state. You've probably hovered over a link before and seen where it changes state based on the mouse's proximity to the link. We're going to be looking at selecting elements based on their attributes. So you can select elements based on by the value of a name or the value of its value attribute. And of course, we're going to be specifying groups of elements, how you combine those selectors together, and so forth. Now, I do want to remind everyone, we will not be having class on Thursday. I won't be available that day. But what I will be doing for you all is posting some YouTube videos, reviewing, inviting you, of course, to join along with me as we do some coding together. I can't emphasize this enough that in order for you to really get the best you can out of this class and develop fluency in HTML, you have to code. You have to just sit down and create web pages. So have your Atom browser available, your Atom development screen software available, and code along with me. Try out the things that we're talking about today. Okay, let me stop sharing this just for a moment. Looks like we're still waiting on a few more people to join us. And I'm going to go ahead and do roll call real quick. Let's see here. Okay, as I call your name, just say here so I can mark you off. Omar?
Here.
Sean?
Here.
Clayton? Clayton? Okay. Stephen? Stephen, are you there? I think I see him joining us. We'll come back to him. Layla? Layla? Okay. Stephen, are you there? May have difficulties today. Thomas? Thomas? Okay. Dylan?
Here.
Alan?
Here.
Stephen, can you hear us? Stephen, if you could just say here if you can hear us. Okay, is your microphone working? Okay, remember for class, we all have to have our cameras turned on so we can validate attendance. Johnson?
Here.
Martin?
Here.
Nimmerlin?
Here.
Justin?
Here.
Jen?
Here.
Okay, Andrew?
Here.
Okay, one moment here. Okay. Stephen, when you get a chance, connect back with me. We just need to make sure your microphone and camera are working. All right. Let's see. I missed some folks earlier when I was calling out attendance. Clayton, are you there? Anyone seen Clayton? Okay. Layla, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Thomas? Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, we're going to do a quick review here of our lesson last week on CSS, and then we're going to jump into the selectors. Go ahead and open up your Moodle page, and you'll see some of the content that we're going to be looking at today. Please make sure that you're reading Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. Chapter 8 was, of course, last week for defining style sheets, and Chapter 9 is defining selectors. Selectors really are the bread and butter of how we set up our CSS and how we tag the elements on the page so that they're styled appropriately. There is a homework assignment this week, homework 7, and I believe next week, week 6, is the midterm. So please make sure that you're taking good notes and keeping track of everything. All right, give me a moment here as I set up the slides and get ready to present. And let's see. Give me one moment. Okay, looks like I'm getting word that Clayton is on his way. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen and we will get going here. Okay, so last week we looked at style sheets, but I want you again to remember the 3 ways that you can embed style sheets, and this is through an external style sheet, an embedded style sheet, and an inline style sheet. If you remember, your external style sheets are they're going to kind of look like this. You're going to have the selector and the declaration body, and it's in general, it's in this syntax. You can have your comments and so forth. Now,
Sir, we are seeing your email.
You're seeing my email. Is it not showing? Or did I click on the wrong one? Well, let's try this again. All right, do you guys see it now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me make sure. Did Clayton just join? There you are.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So again, we have the three ways of formulating our style sheets. We have the external style sheet, the embedded style sheet, and the inline style. If you're creating an external style sheet, remember that it must end with a .css. You want to format your selectors properly. So you have the selector name, the curly bracket, property value, close curly bracket. And just to reiterate the example of how you would do that here. Your external style sheets, you're going to reference them through a link tag or a link element. And you'll specify the rel as style sheet and then the href as the URL to the location of the style sheet. In general, make sure you pay attention to the path. The path is very important when you're referencing the style sheet. It'll create all kinds of headaches for you. You'll want to bang your head against the wall for a while when you realize that you weren't pointing at the right location when things don't work. All right, so that's the link reference. Your CSS that's external, the tags must be located inside the head. So here's the head tag. The link is referenced right here. Always make sure that your external style sheets are referenced from within the head above the body in your HTML. Can everyone see that? Okay. Now, external style sheets, these are always the best design option. This is the best way to accomplish styling your web pages. There are other ways. You could inline them. You could embed the style sheet in the page, but having an external is the cleanest and best way. All right, if you're embedding your style sheet, notice again, it's inside the head tags, and inside the head tag, you'll have a style tag, and the style tag will reference the particular selector and declaration bodies. All right, any questions so far? Okay, so when you're embedding is the second best option. It may be suited for high traffic sites. If there's a lot of people visiting your site and you're trying to optimize the speed, then maybe embedding would be a good way to do it. Embedding styles always overwrite those from external. So if you are pulling in an external style sheet and for some reason you need to do this, embed it, you can do that. The previous version of HTML, before HTML5, would ask you to specify a type in the style. And that's still a good idea to do that, but in HTML5, it does not require this. So previously, you had to specify the tag style with an attribute type saying it's text or CSS. In the past, there was this idea that you could include other types of styling, but in general now, we always know that style is going to point to the formatted CSS. If you remember the important tag, this always wins in a conflict. So if you have the important attribute or the important value set within your property value pair, it will always force that style. So for example here, I have an example of a class called my style. The declaration body says that the color here is going to refer to the text, is going to be red, and this is important. So it doesn't matter wherever else I've specified for .my style, because I have the important here, it's going to override it and force that. Now, your embedded styles can take precedence over external style sheets, depending on where they're called. So if the external style sheet is called after, then it will override the embedded, okay? It all depends. Remember that CSS stands for cascading style sheets. So things that fall down in order. Always the last wins. So with both embedded and external styles, you use the selector, okay? And we're going to talk about selectors in more detail today, but here are 3 examples. We have a body element, we have a class element, and we have an ID element. Excuse me, we have a body selector, we have a class selector, and we have an ID selector. And these selectors are used to specify what parts of the page are visible. So class selectors are always preceded with a dot. So if you have a class, for example, down here I have a class called container. In the CSS, it's always preceded with the dot. If I have a ID, my ID is always referenced with that hashtag or pound sign, whatever, depending on how old you are. That's what you would call that. All right. CSS inline, it takes the greatest precedence, right? It takes the greatest precedence. So in general, the way you do this is you have the tag or the element name, div, the attribute, style, and inside of that you would append the declaration body. Notice that you don't have to put curly brackets here when you're doing it in line on a HTML element. And this takes the greatest precedence. All right, so why would we want to do this? Well, there's really only a couple of reasons for doing this. Maybe you're testing and maybe you're doing testing on your page and you just want to test things on the fly to see what colors are working. You can do it that way. Or let's say that your HTML is in a news feed. Someone subscribed to your page and they're ingesting your content onto their page. Well, if you do not want your information in your news feed to change, then you would use an inline style. In fact, if I had an inline style on a news feed and I wanted it to come out my way, or they had to accept what I gave them, I would use the inline style, but I would also put exclamation important. And that means that they could not override it. It'd be set. It means they wouldn't be able to mess with it. All right, so overriding a style. You can use JavaScript. Now we're going to get into JavaScript later, but JavaScript can override a style. What you would typically do is you would create your JavaScript function, embed it inside script tags. Just like there's style tags, you'd put script tags, and inside that you'd put your function, and you'd have a reference, and the reference would point to whatever on the page. And when the page loads, JavaScript loads last, and it would alter whatever is on the page. You could do it that way dynamically. Don't recommend that, but you could do that. Again, you can use the pound important to override CSS styles, especially if you're ingesting a style. Let's say you're ingesting a newsfeed on your site. You could override their newsfeed as long as they don't have the pound important. You could override it. All right. Keep in mind what wins. Generally, the last rule wins. It always overrides, right? So you go to the kitchen, you're going to fix yourself a sandwich, and your mom says, "Fix me a sandwich too." And then your dad says, "No, I want one first." What do you do, right? What do you do? All right, CSS, last rule always wins. Last rule always wins. That's just the way this works. It's the cleanest way. Unless you have that pound important. The pound important will always override everything. Okay. Some things we didn't cover last week that we need to address. This is the media types. Let's say, for example, you see here we have a media type that says screen, and what this means is literally the computer screen. This style sheet would show up just for the computer screen. But if you gave someone a print option, for example, you could go on any web page and right-click and say print. And if you don't specify a media type print with that CSS, it will default to the screen media type. So maybe you want to have content on your page that is printer friendly. You can do that. You can specify a style sheet with your print.css. Maybe you want it to be all printed within, you know, A440 portrait mode. You could do that, or you could set it A440, not A440, that's music. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So the standard letter height. I've got music on the brain today. Those of you don't know, A440 is the tuning metric. It's the megahertz metric that all standard instruments go by. Anyways, that's not related to this. Just throw that out of your mind. You could use the A4 letter and have the media type be portrait or landscape. You could do that with your print. As well as you could specify a media type of mobile. There are many different media types you could use. In fact, we'll take a look at some of those. You have all as a media type. You have a rural, braille, handheld, print, projection. Projection is useful, right? If you're thinking about you want your web page to be visible on, say, a projector, someone's going to put it up on the screen on a big wide print. TTY and also TV. I haven't seen TV used too much lately, but back in, I guess it was 98, 99, there was this thing that came out called the Web TV. Does anyone remember those little consoles? You could plug it into your TV and it had its own little remote keyboard, and it basically turned your TV into a web browser. It was pretty lame. But you know, if you didn't have a computer and you wanted to surf the web, that's what you could use. All right, so these are the standard possible outputs. You want to keep these in mind when you're using your CSS. You can notice here that you could have a standard CSS file, and you could specify at media print. Notice the curly brackets wrap all of this content. Or you could say at media screen. You could have something down below, and your browser is going to know whether it's going to be printing or if it's going to be on a screen. It's going to know if it's handheld, projection, so forth. Okay? Any questions so far? Now, I want you to keep in mind, you will be using the at media in the future, because for your project, you're going to have to be able to demonstrate that your page is going to work on both a laptop, probably a tablet, a phone, work on multiple devices. So you'll have to know how to specify the media print and the styles so it's picked up. All right.
Question.
Yep.
Can you stack different outputs on one CSS file?
Yes, you sure can. And that's why we see what we see here. We see a @ symbol media print, and it's encapsulating this whole body. And so you would typically have underneath that at media screen or at media all, and you would specify the CSS inside of that declaration body as well. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. CSS selectors. We're going to jump back and forth here because I want you to be able to practice this and kind of get it into your mind what you're doing. So if you could, go ahead and open up your Atom browser. I've got mine already set here. Let me, what is this stuff? Oh, let me bring this over. I don't want it messing. That's my other job. Don't want that messing up or losing that. All right, so I have a sample homework from last week. I'm just going to keep that open, and my index HTML. Let's see here. I'm going to exit from this and go to File, Open File. Actually, I'm just going to open up my website. There we go. There is the website I had opened up earlier. Okay, let me. I think I just closed my, hang on guys, one moment. Yeah, I did. Okay. So I've got a couple of images open here, and what we're going to do is do some examples of selectors. There we go. So standard examples, we have .container, div .container, div container p, and div p, right? So keep in mind with selectors, the two principal parts of any styling rule is the selector, which determines how the formatting is going to be applied, and the declaration, which the selector points to, right? The declaration describes the details, the styles. The selector is kind of like a flag or a bookmark or some way of the computer quickly saying, okay, where is the selector for this? And it says, okay, do all these different functions, right? You could think of it like a function call for those of you who are used to programming. A selector is kind of like a function, right? You call the function and it does certain things. It does the code that you've programmed it to do. All right, so let's look at the selectors. Here we have one. It's a class, right, called container. And here we have another class called container. One's in a span and one's in a div. And so how would I reference it? I could reference it by the class. I could say everything that is a container of container class, or I could say everything that is div.container, or everything that is div.container p first line. We're going to get into those pseudo elements and pseudo classes later, but I could specify it like that, or I could say div, all divs and only the child elements that are p's, right? That's what that greater symbol means. I could specify it in those different kinds of ways. So these are the five types. You could define selectors in any of these five ways. You could have a type, you could have context, you could have a class or ID, you could have a pseudo element or a pseudo class. All right, so let's go ahead and look at selectors by name, right? I'm going to open up my Atom browser again. I have my sample web page here. Stuff about Bird Island. Let's see, I'm going to pull that out, slide it over a little bit. Okay. And in my Atom browser, I'm going to specify some styles about the content I have here. So I have an index, I have an H1, I have a H2, I have a P tag, right? So let's go over to the style for this. I've got the wrong site opened up. Let me get the right one. There we go. Close that one. Close that one. There we go. Here's our index HTML. And there is the style that I have. All right. So I've got my H1. I've got a link, an ahref link. I have a paragraph tag, and inside that I have the image and some text. All right, so if we look at the style, if I want to specify by name, I'd specify by things like the body tag or the A tag or the image tag, right? Or I could specify something like this. I could say, I want my H1s, this is by name. So my H1s to be color gray. I'd refresh it, and now you can see it's affected my color. And so I'm doing this by name of the attribute. Let's say I want the background color to be quite a bit lighter. Let's make it just, let's just make it white, right? I can specify because I'm doing it by name. These are by name, very basic. So I'm specifying by name, and I'm specifying how it should look. I'm going to take out these class selectors for a moment. We'll refresh this. Let's see. Oh, let me show you guys something here that can get a little frustrating. You notice that the style didn't change. Actually, it just did. It's awkward. All right, sometimes though it won't change, and I'm going to show you how to fix that. Within Chrome, you're going to go up here to the gear. So if you're trying to get to that again, you're going to right click, go to inspect, click on the gear, and you're going to come down to your elements and make sure you click disable cache. So what that does is, as long as this screen here is open, any changes you make, it will disable caching those styles and automatically go back and get them. The way that works, anytime you load a web page, there's a temp directory on your computer that stores the elements that are necessary for that web page. So it'll store in the temp all the images that you've pulled down. It'll store in the temp all the CSS, in the temp all the JavaScript. It doesn't do that so much with HTML because HTML it expects maybe to change, but the other files, your images, your CSS, and so forth, those tend to be more stable. But if you're developing, it can be very frustrating if you change something and then your page doesn't change with you to reflect the changes. So you go in there, click on the gear, come down here and say disable cache while DevTools is open. All right, so this window here is your DevTools. So that means that anything that I change in my CSS, it will automatically, when I refresh, pull that information down, as long as that's open. This becomes much more an issue, especially if you're using something like Apache. If you've installed Apache server on your local box, this becomes much more that type of issue, or Tomcat or one of the other application servers. All right, let's get back to selectors though. So you have your body, you have the A tags. These are all by name selectors, by name selectors. All right, let's jump back and look at the other type of selectors. So you could have selectors by ID or by class name, right? So we could create a class in here, and I think we already did in our index HTML. We have an index class called Bird Island. We have a class called NMC Campus, right? So we could create, for our article, we could create a class and we're going to call it dot bird island. Let's go back and make sure I did that correctly, referenced it. Bird island, yeah. So now here's my bird island. Notice again, because it's a class, I have the dot syntax in front of it. You always want to make sure for classes in your CSS, you reference it by dot. That always speaks to the class of what it is. All right, so if I come over here is my bird island text. So I want my, let's see, font over here to be Helvetica. I don't know if that's really going to change as much. Yeah, there's a slight change. You can see it. If we inspect it, you can see the change within the text there. So here's the body. If I inspect this, so it's defaulting to that. Yeah. Let's make it a little bit more apparent. I'm not sure if both of those fonts are very close. Let's see. What's another one? Is it Brush Script? Let's see. If you're on a Mac, you can go to Font Book. If you're on Windows box, it's True Type, I think, or System Fonts. Let's see here. What if it'll let me do this? We're going to change this to Merriweather. I'm not sure if it'll pick it up. We'll see. There we go. So Merriweather was picked up here. For the font down here, we'll say Helvetica. So you can see that we specified the two different fonts. You have to be careful what fonts you use because not everyone is going to have the fonts that are in your font book or in your system fonts for Windows. Later on, I think it's like in chapter 10 or 11, we're going to be looking at web fonts and how you can include those on your in your site so that the user will actually load the font that you want them to see. And that's how you can do that through web fonts. All right, so we've specified a style for Bird Island. Let's set the font size to 16px. We'll click Save, refresh it, and you can see that our font class, our font style. The other way we can do this is by using the ID references. So say we want a particular element on the screen. Typically we would do these, we would reference the elements via something like an input. This is typically where you would see IDs referenced. let's see, placeholder text, please enter your name. All right, so we'll click refresh. There's please enter your name. You type some text on it, right? All right, so we have an ID here. Where did it go? Here it is. The ID is called name. I'm gonna make it more more specific because name can be too generic. We'll just call it full dash name. Okay, so we'll go back to our CSS. We're going to use the # full dash name, and we're going to specify some things for this. So let's play around with it. Let's make the height. Let's make it 20 pixels. Let's make the width. Let's make it 150 pixels. Let's take the border, and we're going to say 1 pixel solid gray. Let's change the text color and make it blue, right? So we'll refresh those elements, and we can see that the height is now 20 pixels. The width is 150. If you need to validate it, you can come over to your inspection tool, of course. And if you inspect it, hover over the input, you'll see that it is, well, the text size is picked up, so that's why it's doing that. So let's make it a little bit bigger. This one is 24, so we'll just make it 26, and it's 156, so we'll make it 60. Refresh it. There we go. So now it's picking up more of the size, right? It's also adding a padding in. We'll have to figure out where the padding is coming from. But if we type in the text, you can see that it's now blue as we specified, right? There's other cool things you could do here, by the way. I think the pseudo class hover is available. Yeah, I believe it is. So let's do this. We're going to talk about pseudo classes in a moment, but this is one of the features. We're going to say hover border 1px solid pink. Let's try that. Refresh it. And you can see it as I hover over it, it changes the background color. These are called pseudo classes. Typically, we always put pseudo classes with double quotes, double colons. It all depends on how the browser is treating them. CSS3 is supposed to be, but as you can see, Chrome is not supporting that. So you have to use the single quote, or excuse me, the single colon. All right, so we did a little bit of the ID and the class, right? And I introduced you to some of the hover. Let's go ahead and look at the other selectors that are available. Again, I want to encourage everyone, please follow along with me. That way you can practice these. You can develop your proficiency at doing these. The other ones are selecting by context. We talked a little bit about context last week, right? These are where there's multiple items. So for example, here we have we have class name architect space paragraph. And so what we're saying in that is choose elements that are descendants. All elements that are descendants, right? So dot architect P is going to give me all elements that are descendants. But if I only want just the children and not the grandchildren, I would use the greater than symbol. Now, it's going to get confusing for some. They're going to like, whoa, wait a minute. Greater than means that. I didn't write the rule. This is what the CSS3 working group has done. But keep in mind that if you only want the P element, the text directly in the P element to be affected, you would use the greater than symbol, right? If you want all of them to be affected, then you take out that greater than, right? All right, so let's jump back over to our Atom browser and we'll run a test. So we have our index HTML here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new section in here. I'm going to call it article, and this is going to be my test text block. Try saying that 5 times fast. All right, we're going to close our article. Inside of that, I'm going to have an H1, and I'm going to call it my class name, test text block. Let's go ahead and refresh it, see what we have happen. There's my test text block. And you'll notice that test text block, it's picking up which style? It's picking up the Merriweather, right? Same as what we have down here. All right, so let's go a little bit further, and I'm going to have a P tag. And in my P tag, I'm just going to this is some text that I am typing for fun. Nah, not really. Inside my P tag, I'm going to have a div. Okay. Close the div. And this is some more text. All right. Let's go ahead and just refresh what we have. Okay. If we inspect it, we can see that this is the text. No, not really. And then down below is the div, right? And the way that this is interpreting it is kind of weird. You're going to see like these extra P tags and everything. Just ignore that because you can see that we have, excuse me, I had the hiccups. You can see that we have the P tags here, and there's the divs. Chrome often interprets these things like this when it's embedded in wrapping. It's its own way of keeping track. All right. The reason I'm doing this is we want to test the functionality of doing selecting elements by context, right? Selecting elements by context. So in the Atom browser, we have the index here. We have article p div. All right. So let's play around with this. The article's class name is what? What was our class name? Test text block. So we'll come in here, we'll paste that in, text test block. And we want what contextual element to follow? Well, let's say that everything in this and the H1. And we're going to say that the font size of this is going to be 56 pixels, right? And so the context here has only affected the H1. I've specified a class name with the name. So the context now is saying everything that's at this level and below. Well, what is at that level and below? If you look back at your HTML, test text block and that tag is only this information here, right? If I went on a step further and I specified an href in here, and I'm going to put a pound sign to, where is it? Full name, because I don't want to type out. I just wanted to reference something locally, right? And I'll just say, go, let's see, update the full name. By the way, you would never do this in real life. You never put like a, I don't know, maybe you would. Typically, you wouldn't do this kind of stuff. You wouldn't put a link inside your H1. Maybe so. All right. Here, so test text block, update the full name. Well, let's go back and look at our CSS real quick. I specify over here that it's going to be this size. So, yeah, so it didn't affect that one. But what about if we say test text block and the pdiv? Do we have any classes in there that affect the P's? Nope. So let's go test. Whoops. That's a cool little feature. Did you catch that? You can collapse your CSS, clicking those down little blocks. All right. Anyways, I'm going to copy this and actually, yeah, I'm going to copy this, come over here, say P, and we're going to change the font size for this to 24px. We'll save it. We'll refresh, and it's only affecting the P text, right? This goes against what I was just telling you. Let's go ahead and test it with the greater than symbol. I'm going to take that out for a second. What do I got going on? Let's check. Yep, that's correct. I'm sorry, guys. Think about it this way. The way this is said is it's only going to affect the P elements, right? And child P elements. But what if I do something like this? Test, text, block, div, color is green. There you go. So you have your context. Now you can form a number of different contexts. Let's take a look here, because there's a lot of different ways you could do this. You could say, I want it to be the P element plus adjacent siblings, right? So what this would do is this would affect the second element. Or you could do things like this, using the pseudo element. You could say P architect, architect P first child. Only make the first child red, right? And that would only affect that piece. Let's see, elements by context. Yep. All right, so other examples of this. So the P plus will select the paragraph that directly follows the previous paragraph. contain in the class selector called .container. So in this example, the .container p plus p selects the paragraph that follows the previous paragraph. All right, let's test it out. Let's go back to our index HTML. We have a P here, and let's do another one. And secondary paragraph. I'm going to take out this div to clean it up a little bit so you all can see it a little better. So we have P, and we're going to do another one. Third. You guys ever have those days where you forget how to spell? I swear I was just looking at paragraph and thinking, how do I spell that again? All right, maybe it's because I'm tired. All right, so let's go back. So we have P, and P, three paragraphs. Let's go to our example over here, and I'm going to take out all of those. According to our text, P plus P, right? P plus P. So we're going to say the P plus the P, and the color we want to be blue. All right, let's test it. So we have it. All right, so we have paragraph and paragraph and the first paragraph. So that makes sense. If we only had, so the first paragraph is not affected, it's only the following paragraphs. Does that make sense? So look at your index HTML again. You have the first paragraph. This is some text I'm typing. Then you have second paragraph and third paragraph. And the style is P plus P. So that's affecting the two follow along paragraphs, but not the primary. All right, so let's look at another example. The H1 tilde H2. The tilde says select the tags that follow the H1. All right. One second here. All right, so we're going to select, let's create an H1 and an H2 and follow with what happens there. So up here, I have my H1. I'm going to take out this stuff I put inside of it. Make it a little more visible. Then we have an H2 we're going to type. This is another header section. So we have our H1 and H2. Let's look at our style. We're going to say H1 tilde H2 color is pink. Okay, let me save it. I'm going to go back, refresh it. And so there it is. We're telling it every element that follows. So I could say this instead. I could say P. So what happens if I use P? It changes every element that follows an H1. Do you see that? What if I change it to an input? Well, I don't think that one's going to work as well as we hoped it to. But you kind of get the idea there. So the tilde, if we look at again the rule, the tilde says select the H2s that follow the H1. So every element that follows this first element. So for example, it could be, say I have an article, every H1 that follows the article, we could change it that way. So we could say article tilde H1. Save it. We'll come over and refresh our page. Now we have to, I think this is probably conflicting with it. There we go. Oh, why is it not working? What do you guys think? Article. This is where it gets into the fun stuff of trying to figure out why a particular syntax doesn't work.
Is it because there's two articles?
I'm not sure about that. I may have missed this. It may depend on what the if the document, if the version of HTML5 or this browser supports that. So let's try it a different way. Let's try a div. Oh, I'm not paying attention, guys. All right, so the rule says it's what follows, right? Where is my H1? Does the H1 follow or is it inside?
Inside.
Yeah. So if my H1 was down here, testing if it is pink. That's what we're trying to do. Let me go back and make sure I didn't mess up the way it was written. H1 article is pink. All right. So we'll refresh it. And there you go. Okay. So that the H1 has, the tilde means it follows. It follows behind it. All right. So then we also have this other idea of first child. We'll select the first child of something, right? Let's go back to our Atom browser. Here we have a good example. We have the H1 article. We could say first child. Whoops. And the first child of every article now is going to be red. Make it stand out a little bit. So we refresh it again. The first article, or the first child of every article, is red. Well, let's look at what we got going on here. So article, what was our, so here we're saying article first child is color red. And it affected the first article, not all articles. Does everyone see that? So you have article first child. Down here, it didn't affect it. The other ones you have are span last child. Span last child. These are often used with like UL unordered list or or ordered list items. Another example you can do is first line and first letter. And we're going to get into those in a moment because those are getting into now what we call pseudo elements. Okay. All right. So your pseudo elements are first line, first letter, after, before. Your pseudo classes are last child, first child, link, hover. CSS3 in general wants you to now use double colons for pseudo classes. Okay. Now the examples I have here, first line, first letter, right? So if we look at first letter, we could say that we want the T of H1. So how do we do that? Well, we would come over to our example over here. We would say H1 first letter, and we're going to make the font size, we're going to make it 56 px, and the color, we're going to make it green. Now you guys know, again, you can always use other colors, right? You don't have to use just the standard. I'm just using them because I don't want to look up the RGBs, but you can use any of those. All right, so I've got a first letter, and we refresh it, it's addressed it, it's changed it, right? So you can address just the first piece. You can also use these to do replacements. So say you have a piece of text and you want to replace something, you can replace it with CSS. You can tell it to pop out that line and replace it with something else if the conditions are right? You can test that. All right, so those are some of your pseudo classes. Let's do another example. Let's do an H1 first line. And we're going to say that our H1, actually, let's do this. Let's change it to a P. We're going to say our paragraph first lines are going to be a color green as well. And font style of italic. So there's our first line of our paragraph. There's the first line of the paragraph. Now the first line of this paragraph is this input item, so it doesn't affect the input item. But you can see that the first line of, these are all paragraphs, and that's the first line of each of those paragraphs. If you look at it again, there's your first line. If we changed it and went down to another line and said, this is a second line that should not be affected by the style. Oops, yeah, style. All right, I refresh it. That's because this is a new line, right? It's a line break. If I refresh it, you're going to see, there it is. It's not green. It's following the style that I specified. All right, any questions so far? Everyone following along and trying the samples? Okay. I want to encourage you, please follow along, because this is only going to get more and more complex as we move forward through the class. And especially as we get to later and later assignments, you could get quickly behind if you're not practicing this and kind of digesting how you do these things. Okay. And the Atom tool set here, the Atom text editor, is a great tool because you'll notice it actually gives a lot of the type aheads for us, right? So we could type P : and it gives us possible values that we could use. So I'm a big fan of using the tools, right? Always use the tools that are before you. We do need to memorize this stuff for the tests because you will be tested on it. But when you're actively developing, it's always good to use the tools because they correct you and they help you and kind of get you going the right direction. All right. So these are different pseudo elements. We did hover already. Let's go ahead and look at things we can do with links. Okay. So the next type of pseudo classes or pseudo elements are these values you can do with links. Let's go back to Atom browser again. We'll pull up our sample. Let's go ahead and create up here at the top a couple of links. We're just going to say Google, and we'll put in the full https / www.google.com. We'll do another one. We'll call this https / www.duckduckgo.com. I'm just going to put a break tag in here so it wraps it to a new line, just for visibility. Scroll to the top. There's our two links, right? All right, so we have these two links, but let's change some of the properties of them. We're going to go right here, and we're going to say that a hover, the color is going to be gray, and text decoration is going to be underlined. Whoops. Right? So we'll highlight that. We'll hover now. It's gray and it's underlined. See that? We'll go ahead and I'll comment this out so we can make sure everyone saw the change. So this is using the comment. Right? So I've commented it out now. I'm going to refresh it. And it doesn't have that feature. All right, so we're going to put it back in. Save it. Refresh it. Now we have that normalized functionality. The other ones that we can use are visited, right? So if we want to alert the user that they've already been to a particular site, particular link on your website. So we use visited, and we'll say that the color, actually we'll leave the color alone, but what we're going to do is change the font style to italic. All right, let me pull that back up. I'll refresh it. Right now, nothing's happening, right? Because we haven't visited. As soon as I click on it, all right, it took me to Google like I expected. I'm going to go back. Oh. Let's use the right one. I think this may be a state issue that it doesn't recognize that I've visited something. Yeah, it is. This is going to be hard for me to test on my screen because of it's a static file. All right, you're visited. You can do various things there. Let's go and check the other one. You have focus, you have hover, and you have active, right? So the way active works is if the link is not disabled, then active will make it show a certain way, right? All right, so those are some of your pseudo classes based on the hyperlink. All right, let's go on down here. Here's some other examples of how you can use them. So you could say you want the link to be color red, visited to be orange, focus to be purple, hover to be green, and so forth, right? Let's go ahead and just copy this and test it out real quick. Paste over that, save it, bring that back up. Refresh it. There we go. So now you can see that the link is red. Hover over it, changes green. Visited is orange. Let's see. Focus, I believe, is when you click on it. Yep. When you click on it, I'm holding down the mouse right now. It changes it to blue. And then, of course, active is blue. And we're not really testing for that right there. All right, any questions so far with your links? Any questions?
Nope.
Everyone's good. Does everyone need to take a break, stand up, stretch, get a drink of water? This is a 2-hour class. So I want to make sure everyone has time to, if you got to run to the restroom, whatever you got to do. Just don't run to Joe 10 or something like that and not come back. All right. So let's go ahead and look at selecting elements based on attributes. This is where by far it can get the most complex, but also the most interesting, because you can be as expressive as you want with your CSS code here by using by attribute. You can apply formatting to elements with specific attributes or attribute values. CSS, this is straight out of your textbook, provides a number of ways to match these, including checking just for the attribute name, or if a whole or partial value. Okay, so here we have an example that the P class, it's going to be color red. I don't know if you would ever really do this, but you could do it this way, where if you have a class specified, you're going to make that paragraph red. Typically, if we had a class specified, we would just recognize it by class. But let's go ahead and look at other possible ways that you can do this. You probably want to take a screenshot of this, because the syntax that's used here, you also can use in JavaScript for specifying values, specifying things on the page. So if you specify the selector just by the attribute, it's going to match whether it has that attribute or not. So in this instance, I could say literally like this. I could say bracket class, and I could specify something. That selector is completely appropriate. Or I could specify by something like this, type. If a tag has a type attribute specified, right? If I look at my HTML and I look at what type attributes are specified, I don't see anything until I get down to right here. So I have a type attribute specified. So using that syntax, I could say I want the color to be, let's see, yeah, the color to be red. And if I refresh it, of course, there's nothing in here right now, but if I type into it, it's blue. That's because, where's it at? Right here. Remember that the last rule always wins, right? Let's make sure we test that. Take type, put it right there. Refresh it. Oh, there's probably a rule I'm not recognizing. Okay. There we go. So you can specify by type. I think if we look at the specificity of this, ID is more specific than type, and that's why it was always carrying the blue. Always remember the specificity rule in how the styles cascade. So you can also specify by value. So attribute equals value. So let's say that I want the attribute to type has to equal text. Now we know that's true for this element because this is a input text, right? So if I refresh it, it's going to be that way. Well, let's say that my type, let's do another one here. We'll create another input type. And this type is going to be a type of button. And I'll take that out. And I'll say value. Click me. Refresh it. All right, so there, notice that the same rule applies from previously in my CSS. I say if the full name is hover, it's pink. Well, my ID has full name, right? Both the button and the text. And when I hover over it, it's just following the rule. If I take that out, now it doesn't follow that rule. But let's look at what we are trying to accomplish here. In our CSS, type equals text is red. And so here it's red. Well, let's say I change this to button now. And I refresh it. Now the attribute selector has specified that it would be red. And there's a number of different ways you could do this. Typically here, they're specifying just the selector as the attribute. You can also specify the name in front of it. So for example, you could say, I want all A's where href equals something to apply to a certain style. Let's do it a different way. Let's do it where, let's see, this one says it equals, this one says tilde value. Tilde value is an exact match of a complete word value in a space-separated word of list. The pipe equals is an exact value or begins with a value. All right, so let's mess with that one for a second. So I have type is button. Let's pull up our our Atom browser again. We have type and so we have button and text, right? So let's take out everything there and do the pipe. Because based on this rule is exactly value or begins with the value that immediately follows, right? So we have, the rule is type pipe equals B. So we'll refresh this and type equals B. Well, it didn't work. So let's look at our syntax again. Equals the value, followed immediately by a blank, by a dash. Let me look that up for you real quick, because I think I've got that. Okay. So the selector is used to select elements with a specified attribute starting with a specified value. The value has to be a whole word, either alone like top or followed by a hyphen. Okay. Let's pull it back up and run the test again. So here is, actually this is not a good example because it's not really going to work with what we need. Let's see, name, and we'll put in my button. So we'll come back over here. We're going to specify by name and my, and I believe that should pick it up now. There we go. The rule is, this is taken directly out of your textbook, this image here, but the rule is basically specifying that it has to begin with a whole word and it can be followed by any dash or hyphen, any dash or hyphen. Okay. You also have ones that begin with a value as a full word or part of a word. That's using the caret symbol. Or we can say it ends with a value. So as a value or full word. Let's go ahead and test the ends with a value. So this is $ equals value. $ equals value. So here we're going to say the $, and what was the name? My button, right? So we're testing just by the value of button. So the name is saying the $ equals button. Anything that ends with that word. So we'll refresh it, and of course it works because it's the color. But let's make sure. So we're going to change it to blue. And there you go. There's the button now is changed based by the attribute. All right, so the other ones you have are the wildcard. It contains a value or a subscreen or part of the word. All right, this is always a good one to know. Let's go ahead and test it real quick. So here we're going to say if it contains button, right? So we refresh it, and of course it works. But let's just say, does it contain a but? We refresh it, and it does. Well, how about does it contain a ton? We refresh it, and of course it does. All right, so those are the selectors based on attributes. You want to make sure you become pretty familiar with these because these will come in handy, especially as you're trying to create special rules based on the content. Special rules contained in the content. All right, so now we get into the next one, and this is your CSS groups. Your CSS groups are a little bit different, but they are just as we specified. They're groups. You'll notice in this example, we have H1 and H2 is a particular color, right? H1 and H2 is a particular color. All right, so let's go ahead and open up our Atom text editor again. And we'll specify based on some text. We're going to say our H1 and our H2. So for me to do this, I'm going to take out some of my previous rules so we can clean this up a little bit. Take all those out. There we go. All right, so I'm going to refresh it so we clean it up. What other rules do I have on here? Article first child, take that out. Okay, we got our hyperlinks here. I'm going to take out these rules just so we can clean things up and be able to look at it a little bit. All right. So the rule is your groups. We're going to use H1 and H2 color red. I'm just going to copy this over and bring it into our code set. So paste that in there. If we're looking at our H1s and our H2s right now, there's nothing very special about them. As soon as I refresh it, you can see that now we specified by a group that all H1s and H2s are going to be that color. This is handy if you don't want to have to type separate declarations for all of the elements, right? So if you remember, my body tag up here, it specifies that everything in the body needs to use a particular font, right? Down here, my Bird Island says my font family for it is going to be different. So last wins, but everything else carries the Merriweather font. The H1 and H2 is after the body. And so the H1 and H2 is still picking up the 14, still picking up the background of white, still picking up the Merriweather. However, the color now is red. If we were to change the body up here and say that we want our color of our font to be gray, the body is saying everything should be gray, but remember, last always wins, so H1 and H2 specify that they're going to be red. And the color for the links is going to be blue, right? All right, so these are some examples of specifying groups. Similarly, you could say something like this. You could say H1, H2, and paragraph are all going to be red. And that would work, right? Or you could say H1, H2, and alphas. Let me take out that P. H1, H2, and alphas are all going to be red. And there you go. You specify that overrides because the last wins. All right, so those are your CSS groups. There's many different variations of this. You could have a number of different things. All right, I want to give you all a quick test. I have up here the a piece of code, CSS. I want you to type this into your own text editors for a moment. Of course, to do this, your Atom text editors are going to have textual elements that have a class called project. You're going to have an H2 with an attribute specified as lang that equals Spanish with a plus P and an EM, you're going to have all of that on the page. So if you could go ahead and construct that real quick. Okay. Go ahead and construct that. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna bring up my browser and hide it from you so you can't see me doing it. Like, oh, that ain't fair. That's all right. I'm going to give you a hint. I'm going to just change some of my my article names to make it a little easier for me. Now, in my style, I'm going to wipe out all other styles on the page. Okay. Let's see. Somebody's happy. All right. Have you guys figured it out yet?
I can't see the rest of the selector code.
Oh, there you go. Is that better?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I'm going to resize this window a little bit. There. Okay. What do y'all think? Have you been able to crack the code yet? I have a working example for you, and I'm going to show it to you in just a moment. So to make it clear, if you read the syntax, we're saying that there has to be a class called project, and that project class is going to contain an H2 that has a language attribute set to Spanish and an adjacent element to the H2, a sibling element. It's going to be a paragraph, and that paragraph contains an emphasis. And we're saying that the emphasis is going to be the color red. Anyone ready to share? I'm going to show you, this is what it should look like. Okay. Let me change this. Spanish header. Okay. This is what it should look like, or something along like that. Okay. Here's an H1, here's an H2, here's a paragraph, and there's an EM. Right? Now the question is, how do you construct the HTML to interpret that CSS? What do you guys think? Let me read it to you so you can kind of think about this in fluency. So I have an element out there with a class name of project, right? And that element with the class name of project contains an H2 header. The H2 header has an attribute called lang that equals Spanish, right? Now there is a sibling element, and that sibling element contains an emphasis around a piece of text. If anyone's got it, say I got it. Anybody? Anyone willing to put themselves out there and give what they think the answer is? What's that? Jen, is that you?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm going to bring up the answer. You guys ready? Anyone would do a drum roll? All right, here we go. Let's look at the challenge. Okay, so the challenge is this. We have a project class, and here I created a project class. Can y'all see this? Is this too small?
No, it's okay.
Okay. So I have a project class, right? It's on an article. So I just reuse my article. And that project has to contain an H2. So here's the article. Does it contain the H2? Yeah, it does. The H2 has to have an attribute called lang set to Spanish, which is ES, right? Now, according to what the challenge says, it must contain an ES, because that's what the that bracket there means, bracket equals. And then according to the CSS, it has to have an adjacent or sibling element. So adjacent or sibling means it's not inside, it's on the same level, right? So H2, here's the H2 closing. So the P element, the paragraph element, is on the same, it's on the same level. And the P element contains an EM. And there's the EM. And that means that that's the only piece of text that should be read. All right. Guys, I know that probably, hopefully it was a fun puzzle for you. That's about all we have for today. Now, we're going to continue with our discussion on Thursday. Again, I won't be here Thursday. So what I'm going to do is put together a set of videos for you. And I want to encourage you to watch the videos and follow along, code along. You want to develop fluency as you move through this. And this is really the only way to do it, to actually just break out a text editor and start coding. Okay. Any questions for me today? All right. Before we close, because I won't be with you on Thursday, I want to go ahead and bring up the course assignment. And let's walk through that. There it is. All right, so your homework 7. I have to log back in again. All right, so your homework 7 is basically can everyone see this? I'm going to blow it up a little bit bigger. So you're going to need to create a cascading style sheet, and you're going to save it as HW07 CSS under the CSS folder. The file should contain proper styles to display the image as instructed. You should not modify any part of the HTML file. Okay, so let's look at the HTML file. What does it look like? It looks like that. And you have to change the CSS, not the HTML, to get it to look like what we see here. Okay? Now the directions are pretty straightforward. You notice that you've got some type of a header color, an H2 color. You have a menu option, which are links. You have some type of emphasis that you're going to need to set the style for, as well as what these dots are, the border around it. All right. Very, very straightforward assignment. For Thursday's video, I will give you a similar video that walks through similar, but I won't be giving you the assignment this time. All right. Okay. You guys have any questions for me? Okay. I know we did a lot today. Hopefully everything you did will stick with you. If you have any questions, just send me an email. Again, just keep practicing it. This is kind of trial and error. You do it, you play around with it, you look at it, just trying to figure out and learn the rules and the way things work. Remember that last in always wins, right? Last in always wins. And think about Think about how the elements are. Are they inside or are they adjacent? That's important as well. All right, guys, I will see you next Tuesday. Of course, I won't see you, but you'll see the videos on Thursday. If you have any questions, I'll stay online for the next 10 minutes or so, and you guys can ask me then. Otherwise, I'll catch you later.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you, sir.
All right, no problem.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Thank you.
Hi, Andrew.